Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I see that folks are logging on and we will begin shortly, but I'm pretty sure many of you are rather familiar with navigating through Zoom. So appreciate your joining us on this. So at this time, just wanted to review with you a few of our intro. Let me check my tech on my end. Give me a quick moment. Okay, so just wanted to say good morning again and half a day to everyone for joining us. I see folks are still signing in. So at this time, just wanted you to feel free to work through, look for the chat box. So you can begin by saying, introducing yourself and where you're from so we know who's in the room. But first of all, I'm Cynthia Cabot with the Guam Coalition Against Sexual Assault and Family Violence. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us. And especially this is one of our earlier starts, but the reason is because we have quite a number of our key partners attending from the East Coast. So we wanted to be able to accommodate the time for them as well. I see some of our webinar groupies, we call, who are certainly joining us. And in the wings, of course, we've got our key partners who are waiting just to help us start and begin this webinar. So you're joining us for our Guam Collaboration Project Roundtable, and it's reflecting on history and culture to address violence in our communities today. We want to thank, of course, our funders who, without their support, we wouldn't be able to pull this together. So we want to acknowledge our funding support from the Office on Violence Against Women, as well as Family Violence Prevention and Services Act. And so I see that our program manager also signed on. So we appreciate your being part of this webinar as well. Thank you so much for joining us. Just to give you a quick preview for our day today, we are going to be doing this welcome and check-in, and you will be hearing from none other than our governor, Leon Guerrero, who has graciously joined us this morning. And then, of course, we will be hearing excerpts from Julian Uggan's recent book that he's just published for us. So we're excited to share that with you. And also our own local historian, Tony Malia Ramirez, will be joining us, as well as Dr. Juan Rapadas. And for those of you who are very familiar with services here on Guam, he certainly has quite a knack and a history, of course, with working with our youth especially. So we appreciate our speakers today. And of course, we have additional speakers for you tomorrow and next week as well. So thank you for joining us. Just wanted to call your attention to that for our webinar materials, please log on to www.guamcoalition.org. And if you click on the blue login button at the top, the username to use is Roundtable. And the password is capital M, capital A, capital R, 2021, all caps. And normally, if we were seeing you face to face and in person, we would be handing these to you in folders, of course, with all the materials. But fortunately, this way through webinars, we're able to participate from across the miles, and you'll be able to access our materials soon after each day, or as soon as we are able to upload those with the help of our web administrator. Just wanted to also note that we are fortunate that the University of Guam has allowed us to provide continuing education units So for 10 contact hours, you are eligible to apply for one CEU. Of course, you will need to email the University of Guam directly to be able to receive those credits. And the subject is, of course, the title 2021 Guam Collaboration Project Roundtable, reflecting on history and culture to address violence in our communities today. Just wanted to remind you, of course, that your input is valuable to us. So upon completion, Zoom is our friend here, and you will be getting a friendly reminder to be sure to complete the evaluation. And if not, we'll have the links available on our login page as well. So just wanted to give you a preview to tomorrow. We have Dr. Tricia Lizama, who'll be joining us and reflecting on culture and addressing healing through culturally responsive ways. So please join us for this. And oh, by the way, I know for some of you, you may have only registered either for day 1 or day 3 or day 4. But to make it easier, we're actually giving you separate links for each day, so you'll be able to join us throughout the 4 days of of this webinar. So at this time, just wanted to say thank you again for participating. And I do want to acknowledge also in the House, more so as a participant today is our key partner, Catherine Chan with the Office of Trafficking in Persons. And because of her, this was actually her idea, along with Kaylin Cockett, to do this Guam collaborative project. So we thank them profusely for including us on this as well. So thank you again. I see many of you have signed in. So welcome. I see quite a number of you from different organizations, from SAMHSA, from OJP Territorial Financial Support Center. I'm just going quickly. Oh, even from Oahu, CFS, or Child and Family Service. And all the way from Washington, DC, yes, to our OTIP team. Thank you so much, as well as FIPSA. Thank you again. So on that note, just wanted to begin, of course, being that we are reflecting on history and culture, it would be very appropriate for us to share with you then our bendition. So to give you a background on that, our bendition is actually a blessing. And in that light, let me get my system here in place. You know, with all this technology, normally we'll just wait for queuing in, but you know, we are a small nonprofit organization, so we pretty much rely on each other for doing the different parts. So just wanted to get this situated, and hopefully you'll be able to see my screen. Give me a quick moment. You know, thanks to COVID, we have pretty much been more adept at being able to navigate through Zoom and provide with the assistance of technology at our fingertips, getting all these together. So I certainly hope I am able to get this going to you. But just wanted to do a quick brief on this. I will be playing for you with the bendition, which is Chamorro for blessing. And so what is typical here is, well, this music that I will be sharing with you actually brings together the 3 different prayers. Katinkulu o Asaina Hinatsan Ilate. So just wanted to give you a brief of the English translation, and I hope I've got the correct translations to this. So here it goes. The call of the conch from the south, the call of the conch from the north, gathers the spirits of our ancestors, guide our path forward. Our ancestors carry us. Our ancestors, watch over us. Guide the canoe forward, the vessel of life, in the heavens where it all began. O ancient one, the spirit of all who gave us endurance and resilience. Ancestors are spirits. They are the ones who gave us strength and goodness. Give us strength to work and dig on your land. Strengthen us as we build our lives. Sustain the life of the land. So now I will share. Thank you so much. Just wanted to point out that certainly um, it is because who have preceded us, who have laid the way to make it possible for us to travel on this path. So without further ado, of course, we are certainly very fortunate to join us with our opening remarks, um, none other than our governor, Lou Leon Guerrero. And I just wanted to give you a brief for those of you who are joining us from across the ocean. Lourdes Leon Guerrero was elected as the first woman governor of Guam in November 2018. Prior to serving as our governor, she was the president and chair of the board of Bank of Guam for a dozen years, and prior to that, served a decade as a senator in the Guam legislature. Before her political career, she was a nurse and active with many community networks, including serving as the Guampedia board chair and helping to establish the first Guam Women's Chamber of Commerce and serving as its first president. We are certainly to we are certainly honored to have our Magahaga, our governor, the Honorable Lou Leon Guerrero.
Si Zeus Masi Cynthia, ni i invitasyon mizu para bay cuentos, para tafanguentos, na okasyon gos importante sa tisinya hita na tanai isolusyon para na lamolig mo na inila lata ang gintimandanya hit todo ginin itanota and isan hizung saniman malik idian niya lokwi para usa zata sugu mo na i mas malik na solusyon para criminal sexual abuse. So again, Cynthia, thank you so much for this very important conversation about our Chamorro history and culture and how we can draw on our past and our cultural practices to decrease and hopefully eliminate instances of violence in our community today. In preparing for this morning's remarks, I came across a very disturbing statistic. The fact that while instances of reported sexual assault have decreased from 2018 and 2020, here in our island, our Guam Police Department statistics show that the percentage of sexual assaults reported against minors has increased to the point that assaults against minors were 75% of the total number of sexual assaults reported in 2020. That is very frightening. Our Chamorro culture values children. We know this. What we need now to do is figure out is how to get back to those values of respect for one another and certainly respect for our children. This roundtable is an excellent way to elevate the conversation and figure out how we can use our history and our cultural practices to stop this violence that seems to be bubbling up to the surface in our community. I am very thrilled to see our federal partners present in this conversation. I want to give a special welcome to Catherine Chon, Director of the Office on Trafficking in Persons at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Catherine, we welcome your help to address human trafficking issues we face on our island. We know that human trafficking, sexual assault, drug addiction, and prostitution intertwine. Oftentimes, cultural clashes can be a catalyst for these crimes and hinder law enforcement and community efforts to stop them. We have other elements in our community that breed violence and crime, such as unstable living conditions, substance abuse, poverty, construction work, military bases. And we know that the internet is being used as a tool to perpetuate some of the evils that have permeated our island. But we also have a very proud, giving, generous, matriarchal Chamorro culture to help us fight these issues. If we can just hold on to and revive our cultural values, of respect, generosity, and inafa malik, we will create a community in which all are valued, appreciated, protected, and treated fairly. As Guam's Magahaga, I am here to thank you for participating in this roundtable and to tell you that we are addressing these issues. Yesterday, we just opened Guma Famalawin, our Salvation Army Lighthouse residential treatment for women, which offers treatment and hope for women struggling with substance abuse. With educational efforts offered by the coalition, our Bureau of Women's Affairs, and other community partners with outreach about our victim services through law and enforcement efforts, such as cargo inspection facility at the port to capture drugs before and our courts through proposed legislation and with community involvement. This series is part of that effort. As anyone who is Chamorro will tell you, the Magahaga of the home is the one who actually rules and makes the decisions. So when the Magahaga of Guam says it will happen, be assured that it will happen. All of these efforts will help to stem this tide of violence and make our communities safer for everyone. Again, Sizus Maasi, and have a productive and enlightening conversation these next 4 years. And be assured that my administration, together with Lieutenant Governor Josh Tenorio and our people in our administration, are committed to helping and providing the resources necessary, again, to make our communities safer for everyone. Sizus Maasi.
Tangtulun na si Zeus Maasi, Sana Maasi, Governor. We appreciate your taking time away from your busy schedule to joining us. And so we certainly appreciate your being our leader and of course, taking the lead in our webinar today. So our thanks. So certainly, besides our governor, we do have all of you that we want to acknowledge. We would like to call out each and every one of you, but we would probably take all day in acknowledging all of the contributions that you have made, one to help Guam prosper and nourish itself and sustain as our ancestors have. So for our next presentation, he wasn't able to join us in person, but certainly he has provided for us a recording and will share with us an excerpt from his new book. Just wanted to caution because in light of the issue of sexual assault, domestic violence, human trafficking, oftentimes these issues are triggering to many of us. So just wanted to forewarn you. We want to ensure that, again, you take care of yourself. What COVID has done for us through this pandemic, where we feel safer at home, unfortunately for many, that was not the case. But I think what we need to do is care for ourselves so that we can in turn care for others too. So the next person that I would like to also acknowledge, then our next speaker rather, is Julian Uggan. Julian is actually instrumental in the work of helping us form the Guam Coalition back in the early 2000s, when of course the Office on Violence Against Women sent out its TA providers and said, Guam, there shall be an SA, sexual assault, domestic violence on Guam. Domestic Violence Coalition, on Guam. So he was part of the initial team to help us move this forward. Julian is actually an international human rights lawyer and the visionary behind Blue Ocean Law. His projects include working with the Marshall Islands to seek redress for the harms of nuclear testing and non-consensual medical experimentation, defending the fundamental right of self-determination of the native inhabitants of Guam before the US federal courts, and developing legal strategies to hold countries and corporations accountable for their contributions to climate change. He is currently a lecturer in law at the William S. Richardson School of Law, where he teaches Pacific Islands legal system. So if you would give me a quick moment while I find him on my screen, I will play for you from his.
Hafaday, this is Julian again speaking to you from my home. Thank you so much to Cynthia Cabot and to the rest of the team of conference organizers for inviting me to participate in your event, albeit only virtually, and to join all of you as you reflect on history and culture and the role that those forces play in addressing violence in our communities today. I am the author of the newly released, well, a soon to be released, the book entitled The Properties of Perpetual Light. And this is a book that I wrote in the middle of the pandemic last year in 2020, as I was dealing with a wide range of emotions, from rage at what I was witnessing in Guam. I believe, as an aside, that the pandemic really laid bare lots of sort of structural inequalities and sort of the disparate impact, that certain sort of policies have on our communities. And I was dealing with that as well as just an overwhelming sense of grappling with loss, both individual and collective loss. I think 2020 was a year in some ways where sort of all of our sort of long forgotten chickens came home to roost at once. And it was a really tough year for everyone across the board. And so I really found that I was able to, because of all of that space and distance that the pandemic sort of created, I was able to sort of quiet down the noise of the outside world and sort of be alone with my own thoughts. And so I was successfully able to write a book, and it's now being published in a few days. It's officially launching on March 29th. And yeah, so when Cynthia asked me to speak at this event, I figured I knew exactly what piece I would want to read from the book. In December 2018, I gave a commencement address to the graduating class of the University of Guam. And I really think that this speech sort of contains a lot of sort of similar themes, some themes that you all have addressed and or are addressing in your event this week about trauma, um, personal, interpersonal, familial, and a sort of grief, and our ability or inability to sort of work through that grief and that process. And so this piece is sort of really, it feels really relevant. It feels pertinent to sort of this theme, and that's why I sort of wanted to read from it for you. So this piece, I'll just read you an excerpt from it. This piece is entitled Fighting Words. There is a language heist afoot in this country that is threatening our ability to show up for each other and for ourselves. We are losing our capacity to confront the injustice that is literally everywhere around us. And I think it has something to do with the kind of violence we are seeing today. In one sense, the violence raining down on the most vulnerable among us, immigrants, indigenous peoples, asylum seekers, refugees, women, children, is horrifying. But it is not startling. Acts of violence against these and other groups are occurring with such frequency, news of it is not, in fact, new. Stories of thousands of children being separated from their parents, caged, and tear gassed at the border. Stories of one unarmed Black boy after another, being shot dead by a murderous cop. These stories don't just come in with the morning paper, they come in with the morning light. These are stories of brutality, and yet they have become as banal as breakfast, bacon and eggs, a cup of coffee. It is this banality of brutality that is truly troubling. One would think this enough to send us careening into collective action, but it's not. At least it hasn't been. I think part of the problem is that something else is happening too. The violence that is everywhere erupting at the borders of this country, in waffle houses in Georgia, in parking lots in Guam, is of a different degree. A man choked to death for selling loose cigarettes. A woman shot to death for burning white rice. What we are seeing in our communities is increasingly barbaric behavior, and it's immobilizing us, rendering us momentarily incapable of speaking back, and speaking up. One of my favorite writers, Alice Walker, wrote a book about this phenomenon. Some years ago, while working with a women's anti war group, she traveled to Rwanda, the Eastern Congo, and Palestine, meeting with survivors of every conceivable kind of violence and listening closely to their accounts. In Rwanda, she recalls the racist origins of the genocide that rocked that country, culminating in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Tutsis by the Hutu. She traces the story all the way back to the Belgians and the Germans before that, who arrived on the scene after centuries of relatively peaceful coexistence between the two clans. So the Belgians decide that the Tutsi, because they had larger skulls, were more like Europeans and thus should be in charge of the Hutu, whose skulls apparently were not as large. They instigate this rule of one clan by the other, and it goes on like this for years. When they finally leave, the Belgians place the Tutsi in charge of the Hutu. Unsurprisingly, the hatred that had been building over such a long period erupted into the mass slaughter of 800,000 Tutsis. 800,000 Tutsis in 100 days. On her way to Palestine, while waiting at a border crossing in Rafah, a traveling companion hands Alice an illustrated postcard depicting a UN partition plan. On the back of the card are the words of former Israeli President Ariel Sharon, known by many as the Butcher of Beirut, where he talks about making a pastrami sandwich of the Palestinian people. Quote, riddling their lands with Jewish settlements until no one will be able to imagine a whole Palestine or know it ever existed. Later, in the Gaza Strip, Alice sits in the rubble of recently bulldozed Palestinian homes. She learns of a woman alive but unconscious, whose husband was killed during a 22-day bombardment of Gaza, as were all five of her daughters. She wonders who will tell this woman this when or if she wakes up. She wonders what language could possibly be up for the job. How do you tell a woman that her whole world has died? Finally, in the Eastern Congo, Alice meets with women who had been victims of rape on the scale of war crimes. One woman, who had been a sex slave for over a year until she escaped, talks about being raped with every imaginable instrument, from the handle of a machete to the barrel of a gun. Others share similar stories, but one story shakes Alice to her core. She writes, quote, the suffering had been unbearable as people were chased from their homes at all hours of the day or night, many of them choosing to sleep in the forest or hide themselves in their fields. She was home with her husband and her two children because, among other reasons, such as this was her home, her husband was sick. One evening, there was a fierce knock at the door. Gunmen who also carried machetes entered, demanding food. There was little to offer them but the staple diet, a boiled vegetable and a few balls of steamed millet. The men ate this, but were angry and not satisfied. They went and found the husband, still in bed, and hacked him to pieces. They came back to Jen Rose and her children and took hold of her. They cut off her leg, cut it into 6 pieces, and began to fry it in a pan. When some part of it seemed nearly done, they tried to force her son to take a bite of it. Strongly, beautifully, and so much the son of our dreams, he said, no, I will not eat my mother's flesh. They shot him to death. The daughter, Seeing this, watched her mother bleeding to death, knowing her father had been hacked to pieces, was now offered the same opportunity. Her mother, having crawled away, does not know what became of her. Terrorized, she bit into a piece of her mother's body. Though she doesn't know, sorry, Terrorized, she bit into a piece of her mother's body. Her mother, having crawled away, does not know what became of her, though she does know that her assailants went next door that same evening and murdered a couple who'd been married that day, raping and mutilating the bride and tearing out her eyes. I have not forgotten this child who was forced to eat her mother's flesh for a moment. Yet, it has been almost impossible to speak of it. Coming home, I fell ill with the burden of this story. The book is called Overcoming Speechlessness. When asked why she titled it that, Alice responded by saying that there are times when things are so horrible, we literally lose the ability to talk about them. That is to say, in the face of suffering such as this, unspeakable suffering, we come undone. We are left bereft of words to bear witness, constitutionally incapable of coming to anyone's rescue, including our own. In the book, she is calling us to overcome that speechlessness, to push past it, to take a step beyond our trauma and into the sun. So, here goes. The first time I experienced this phenomenon was in the summer before fourth grade. My family and I had been living in Portland, Oregon for 2 years so that my mom could earn a master's degree in social work. Around the time she was finishing, my dad was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. At the same time, my grandmother, who was suffering from early onset dementia, was sent to Guam ahead of the rest of us, temporarily entrusted to a relative's care. One day, after my sister and me had returned home, we were taken to this same relative's house. What I saw that day would sit for years like a stopper in my throat. Once at the house, we asked over and over again to see our grandmother, wondering why she was being kept from us. Some time passed, then some more. After what seemed like an eternity, we heard a banging coming from a bedroom in the back. My uncle scurried away to attend to the noise. Unbeknownst to him, I had snuck quietly behind. When he threw open the door, I saw her, my grandmother, half naked and tied to the bed. A brown rope, a silver bowl on the floor. Our eyes met. Hers were wild with fear. I froze. Then, a slamming of a door. Then, an uncle with a smirk on his face and a key for a lock in his hand. I must have passed out. The next thing I remember is my 8-year-old body hanging upside down by its ankles, crying as 2 of my cousins passed me back and forth, laughing, knowing there was little I could do about it, because I was little, and I had too little power. And I did not have the words with which to fight back, graft my rage onto the world, wage war. I had no command over the language I needed to set me or her free. We would eventually get our grandmother out of that house, and she would spend several more years with us into the evening of her life. Mine was the last face she would recognize and the last name she would remember. My last act was singing to her, which incidentally was perfect form, as this was the same woman who played a mean harmonica and taught me to love music, the blues mostly, and bequeathed to me so many gifts, though of the spiritual and not the earthly kind, including an almost religious belief that if God had a voice, it would be Aretha Franklin's. I've never shared any of this before, but I'm sharing it with you because I'm trying to be brave, and because, as a writer, this is my work to do. As the supremely gifted Arundhati Roy says, we are living in a time when our words have been butchered and bled of meaning. We writers then are called to take pail to water in this leaky boat of ours, to run toward, not from, our burning house. If not to rescue everyone, then to help as many people as possible rescue themselves by rescuing back language itself, back from the butcher. These days, I take pail to water mostly in my capacity as a human rights lawyer. Together with my team, we work both here at home and throughout the region using the law to advance the rights and interests of island communities. We provide guidance to small island states trying to better protect their natural resources from outside exploitation. We help coastal communities challenge the multinational corporations aggressively seeking to mine the surrounding seabed, no matter the environmental or cultural cost. We go to court to defend the right of self-determination because the most categorically legitimate longing of human beings is the longing to be free. I share this because this is what it looks like when we are able to overcome our speechlessness, to overcome our speechlessness, find our fighting words, and step into the sun. We share the sunlight. Graduates, if you look under your seats, you will see your own copy of Overcoming Speechlessness. I worked with the publisher, the good folks at Seven Stories Press in New York, and was able to buy each of you a copy. Lucky for me, they had exactly 273 copies left in their warehouse, which incidentally was exactly enough. Lucky for you, Alice Walker is among the most gifted of us, the kind of writer whose words are so powerful they are like ancestors, loved ones wishing to redeem us, to carry us closer to freedom, on their backs if need be. Graduates, may you find not only your fighting words, but your fighting spirit too. Our broken world is waiting. Thank you so much.
We wish to thank Julian again for sharing his stories as well with us. I know at some points in that it was difficult to hear, but oftentimes may we also look at overcoming speechlessness. If we can, lift also the voices of victims so that they can also reach out for assistance, reach out perhaps to you for help. And also in that light, just as he shared uh, during his speech to the students, where he noted that he had books for each one of them. Well, so too, we did acquire copies of his latest book, Properties of Perpetual Light. So if you wish for a copy, please put in the chat. And what we will do is we will do a quick random pick at the end. And of course, the more times that you participate, the greater your chances of getting one of the few copies that we do have. So we would like to share that with you as well. Again, we wish to thank Julian again for joining us. And certainly he has been, of course, instrumental in the coalition's early beginnings. So he holds a special place for us here at the coalition. And we, of course, thank him profusely for his continued support. Now we have waiting in the wings, our next speaker, who comes with much knowledge of our history and background. And we are excited that she's able to join us on this. So just wanted to cue Malia Ramirez. Let me introduce her first and she can set her slides momentarily. We have Tony Malia Ramirez. Malia is of Chamorro descent, the indigenous people of the Mariana Islands. She speaks, writes, and lectures in her indigenous language, Chamorro. For over 5 decades, she has become known as a Chamorro traditional scholar. Her knowledge of Chamorro culture, history, and language was obtained through Chamorro oral histories. Academically, from different Western institutions of higher education, she relied extensively on Chamorro histories to write and publish her research. One publication is Chamorro Genealogy, The Sangre Llama, The Blood Calls. She also wrote one of the first accounts on Chamorro proverbs, Los Ejemplos Chamorritos. Written almost entirely in Chamorro, the proverbs are the foundation of Chamorro values and beliefs. She also has unpublished accounts on Chamorro heritage through decades of her lifetime research. Her research is valuable because they are not documented in academic accounts. Currently, she is a historian of the Department of Parks and Recreation. She has maintained this position for nearly 26 years. Her primary role is the guardianship of historic resources of the island of Guam. So I'm calling on Malia now, if you can join us.
Hapade Taurus, greetings to everybody. Hapanielus, my brethren. Gof Maguftu, I am very pleased. Na-find to si Cynthia that Cynthia asked me para be adingani to address you with historia de ni culturen y las Islas Marianas, especialmente Guam. So, Gov Dunkel sin oportunidad, this is an important opportunity for me. Sa ginestina klasen manera in this forum, senior wadingani megigita hamtu, the managam de Guam, and you are not even here in Guam. Pues giningwao, saludo, and from me, a very gracious salutation to all. I hear there's audiences from Palau, so Ali Bilao, Inoti Marianas, Northern Marianas, Hafa Day, then Olomai, and I believe we also have audiences from Rook and Chamorro, Chuk in English, Rai Anam, and I believe also Ponape, Casalelia, and of course Marshall and the Kershrai area of the Micronesian region, and of course to the United States. Let me begin by emphasizing the knowledge that I attained to understand the history and culture of Guam from a Chamorro perspective, from the way Itaimano y Chamorro na comprende y pinapos niya how the Chamorro understands their past. The importante na comprende siya, and it's very important that you do understand this. Beginning with the slides. Let us first begin with the beginning with the first slide. Let me first begin. Madabitutun, the Bisangani Hamdu Managagi Guam, Guam. Where is Guam? Because many of you are not familiar with the area. So Guam is located in the northwestern Pacific. We are 900 miles north of the equator. We are really only within 4 hours of flying time between many of the regions of Asia, to Japan, Korea, Philippines, even to Australia, which is only a 4-hour flying time. So we are at the crossroads of the Pacific. Now, due to our location, Pulimanu Nagagi, Guam, where Guam is located, we eventually, through history, through the arrival of the Ferdinand Elcano expedition. In fact, we just celebrated the quicentennial anniversary of that event that occurred on March 6, 1521. So March 6, 2021 marks the 500th anniversary of the encounter between the first Pacific Islanders, Iman Chamorro, then Itauto Gilago, the Europeans. And beginning with that timeline, with the first encounter also mark the first violent offense that was committed against the Chamorro when the visiting expedition, within their 3-day stay in the 3-day stay here in Guam and in the Marianas, eventually through miscommunication of the word inatulika, which in English means trade, became disputed, and the Magellan expedition returned to the village of Umatag, burned the houses, killed Chamorros during that event. And that marked the first encounter of Imangilagu, the Europeans, and Iman Chamorro, the first people in the Pacific to encounter the Western world. Now, Guam is the largest island in the Micronesian region, and not only the largest island, it also has the largest population, and it has become the center of commerce, basically in the Micronesian region. Because as our history progressed from the Spanish to today, we were interwoven by these different administrations, from the Spanish to the Japanese to the American administration, with the exception of the German administration that did not govern Guam. The timeline, I, as the historian of Guam, only divides it into 5 major timelines. The other timelines, as done by the Guampedia, has 2 more added into the significant timelines. I subtitled those timelines. So the major timelines of the Marianas history is the first, the pre-contact period. And through archaeological evidence and other sources of academic research, appointed that the Marianas were probably settled as early as 4,000 years ago. Again, we are the first navigators to reach this part of the Pacific, Las Marianas. After the Spanish, from the time of Magellan, 1521 up to 1898, the United States stepped into Guam due to the Spanish-American War and took control of Guam. This is in 1898 to 1899. The rest of the Marianas was sold to Germany at that time. After the first administration of the American, what we call the Naval Government of Guam, World War II entered into our area. And that began on December 8, 1941, extending to August of 1944. It's a 3-year period of our history, but because it occurred during that time, World War II among the Chamorro elders, our scientists, is still a living history. They still recall the experiences of World War II. Following World War II, 1944 up to 1945, the Americans reassumed the administration of Guam to date 2021. Those are the 4 significant timelines for Guam. For the Northern Marianas, they have 1 more. That's the German administration. The first people, the Manautotasi, the people of the ocean, the Manautohaza, the people of the land. Who were they? What was their origin? We are of the Proto-Austronesian origin as a group of people, and we also, our language, Chamorro, is a Proto-Austronesian derivative. And the Proto-Austronesian group of people and language is the largest ethnic group on the globe in terms of its distance from Madagascar, the island off the coast of Eastern Africa, extending over to Easter Island, close to the South American continent, extending to Formosa, Las Marianas, the state of Hawaii, New Zealandia, New Zealand, and portions of Melanesia. That's the extent of the Proto-Austronesian ethnic group and language. We are the most widespread. So our ancestors came here. And so within this 3,500 years of relatively isolation, the pre-contact people, Iman Chamorro, had a very well-organized social organization. They were basically a non-monarch government, and each settlement governed their own area. And that's how life went in their time of history. And one of the political leaders, in a just for a comment that he made, because he was talking to me, he said, "You know what, Malia? Our ancestors, Imansamoto, did not have central government. We today have central government. But let me tell you something. They were more organized then than we are today. They are more caring during that period of history than we are today." So that speaks a lot of volume of what occurred during the pre-contact period through the first introduction of Western concept in our homeland, the Mariana Islands, Guam. So with this contact, you will see the different events that eventually shape who we are today. And again, these contacts were very influential in the way the Mansamoto, the indigenous people of the Marianas, moved forward during these 4 to 5 administrations. This is the very beautiful pre-war village of Sumay, 1930. Very beautiful, which was the economic lifeline of Guam. Roughly about 2,000 people living there before and during World War II. It was the first site of the first China Clipper Pan American landing site that connected San Francisco into Asia, Sumay Village. Again, it was a very well organized village. The Chamorros lived there, and they were very well organized. They took care of matters until one day. These are the residents of Sumay, the Kotla family, or one of them. World War II occurred. December 7th, 1941. And the Japanese assumed control of Guam for almost 3 years. They already control the Northern Marianas since 1914 under the Japanese administration of Guam of the Northern Islands, as well as Micronesia. But this is 1944, when the Americans returned to recapture Guam. The 3 earlier slides was what that village looked like. This is what it looked like after the bombardment of the American forces in 1944. They were the ones that destroyed Sumay through the aerial bombardment. And what does this say to me as a Chamorro, as a descendant of my ancestors, through this destruction? And how did the signers communicate this to me? And what they said to me, "Padgonu, my child, hasu esti, think about this. Di Julio de 1944 in 1944, Bangay Gumaam, Bangay Singsungham, we have our own village. Mamakoniang, we were taken out of the village by the Japanese forces and were brought to the concentration camp. And we stayed there for about 3 weeks. When they returned, this is what they saw, the total destruction of Sumay." So imagine the violent act that was made to an indigenous culture of an event that was not their making. They had nothing to do with World War II. This was a historical event between 2 warring nations, Los Estados Unidos, the United States, and upon Japan. The Chamorros were simply caught in the crossfire of this major event, which again today is still a living history. This is then in Gracia, Familian Galidi, Diaz, married to the Kotla clan, Pangilinan, and her grandchildren. So I know Tening Gracia. I know her daughters, or many of her children, and I know some of the grandchildren. And like my mother, I would imagine that her children would say, "But Nana, grandmother, where did you grow up? And I know what Tenny Rocha would say. Oh, over there. Like me. Mom, where did you grow up? Oh, over there. But where over there? That area over there. The mom thought that agree, thought no agua. But mom, there's nothing there. It's only a land. No, but that's where I grew up. So here you have these two warring nations destroying the historical timeline of a given indigenous group. You have just erased their history through the bombardment and through the destruction brought upon by World War II. Now, this is the capital of Guam, or Guam today, but formerly the capital of the Mariana Islands, Hagatnya. This is where my parents grew up. A 1930 beautiful photograph of the oldest European city of European heritage. This is where my mother grew up. This is what she remembered. When I showed her this slide and my dad, they remembered all the streets. They remember some of the houses. Aganya. Again, a very beautiful colonial city established since roughly 1672, or in that period. And this is what happened. And within 3 weeks, when my parents were uprooted from Aganya to go to the concentration camp, in their case, Menengan. And when they returned, they could not believe what had happened to their space where they grew up. All the memories they had, from the church they went to the streets they walked on, to the houses that were very memorable to them, to the families that were their neighbors. Because before the war, Hagåtña is walkable. It wasn't a large city. So they knew, especially my father, who worked for the naval government. He was a messenger for the US naval governors of Guam from 1929 up until the outbreak of World War II in 1944 here in Guam. But this is what they returned to. Now, as a descendant of a post-war Chamorro, I really, truly really question what happened to the Chamorro people during this event of World War II. How did they manage to move forward after the destruction? Because you have to remember, and I always address this very pivotal point. Yes, the Japanese soldiers were here. Yes, the American soldiers here to fight the war. But after the war, they went home. Who remained? Who remained? Ask yourself that. And it was the Mansamoto. That's why in our culture, as I wrote in my book of Proverbs, Los Ejemplos Samoritos, panatagwitan niya ani, sumasulikaw pagu, kumakasawagupa. This is a very strong proverb that the Chamorros upheld to. That the winds of change of any administration, you never know, since the arrival of the Spanish here to our island. And there is no guarantee that the flag that's flying today will remain. Our history has shown us that the Spanish flag was flown here during their period of 3 centuries or over 2 centuries. The German flag was flown here. The Japanese flag was flown here, but they eventually did not fly. And today we have the American flag. But no matter what, their panatagwisan haani is upheld, that these are the winds of change in the Mariana Islands. It's very interesting because sometimes they question me about the validity of Chamorro oral history as opposed to the academic scholarship of all the written books that have been written about Guam, especially about World War II. So I invited one of the elders. She was 17 at the time of the outbreak of World War I back in 1940. I mean, World War II, at the outbreak of the outbreak of World War II on December 8, 1941. And this is at the university, and all the students were sitting down, and they were all talking about the books they've read, all these different citations, and about historical resources and all that. And when I asked her to make a comment, she stood up and she simply said, "You all have read the books. You have all read the resources, but you know what? I didn't read them. I lived it. I lived this time of the most critical period in our own history, World War II, here in Guam. Going to this period of World War II, also, just to emphasize my role as a historian of Guam, I am the guardian of historic sites here in Guam, historic structures and all that. That's my role. That's my duty. That's my responsibility to protect these sites. Well, 20 years ago, the nominations for the Japanese gun emplacements were made in the village of Tumon, the tourism side of Guam here, the hub of tourism. And there are about, I believe, 7 gun emplacements built along the coastline of what we know today as Tumhum Bay, Tumon Bay. So I asked one of the World War II generation to come and speak on behalf of the protection of these gun emplacements. And I just took that simply as the testimony would be favorable to the nomination. When I called upon the individual, stood up and addressed the board and stated, I am not here to defend the protection of these World War II gun emplacements built by the Japanese. As a Chamorro, as somebody indigenous, I would prefer if they were removed, destroyed. I didn't ask him why he made that comment, but eventually I did see him, and he said to me, "But Gonu, my child, why do I want to remember Tumhum, where he would frequent? That Tumhum is a World War II site. He didn't want to remember that. And why should he? He's indigenous. He has the right to this land." So that was why I said, remove them. Let the beauty of Tumhum come back and erase the scars of war of that beautiful coastline. And that was a common name. Now, again, Hagåtña, after the destruction, okay, of World War II, totally leveled off by the American forces. And this is what we do today. We build sites, monuments, to explain these sites. The first slide above is the Guam Insular Forest Guard Monument to honor the Chamorro men during the U.S. Naval Government of Guam to protect Guam, basically without any arms, against the invading force, the Japanese. Below is the Ricardo J. Berdalio Governor's Complex, located in a place called in Chamorro, Adaluk. In the English, it's Adaluk, but in Chamorro, it's Adaluk, and it has meaning. And when you look at the governor's office, how, as I, each Chamorro, looking at this current setup of the government, of the 3 branches and all that, this is the executive branch. And I grew up with this. This is the administration that I grew up. And it really brings a lot of retrospect in me when I look through the 4,000 years of my people's history. Here you see the Paseo de Susana, named after one of the Spanish governors. Why? When you look at this landmass, it's not natural. It was man-made. This was all the debris of the historic city of Hagåtña. Because as I stated earlier, the American naval government decided to level off almost everything that was historical of Hagåtña. There is very few remnants of the Spanish city that reflects our history in Hagåtña. These are the Laddie structures that were built around 800 AD up until maybe the 1500 or 1500 AD. And these are the silent reminders of our Zionists who lived here during that period of time. Now, why is the Laddie structure very pivotal in our culture? because this is our link. This is us. It's not a history of another nation that came here and made it their history. No, this is our history. And this is what I would like to know and learn about in terms of the historical development of we as a Chamorro people. So the Ladi structure is the foundation of the traditional house. In Chamorro, we call it haligi. That's the word that is used in the Proto-Austronesian language that still survives here in the Chamorro, or still survives in the Chamorro language. And it is so beautiful that as you look at these Ladi structures, and there are still many sites on Guam and Rota that remind us of this past of our ancestors at the time that they had full control or control of our own islands, Las Islas Marianas. This is, I believe, the Warren of the Pacific National Historical Park, National Park Service, and the Ascent Beach unit. And there are 7 sites to the WAPA, as we call it today, NPS. And these are the reminders of World War II. And as I stated earlier, it's a living history. And to me, this site, interwoven with Chamorro history, is truly sacred in terms that many young soldiers, both American and especially Japanese, died on this land right here that you're looking at, this park area. And what I go through when I'm thinking about this, here I am as a Chamorro, and thinking of the violence that occurred here nearly or more than 70 years ago, it really just kind of brings me to light that, you know, such a beautiful place, Las Marianas, and got caught in this World War II situation. Again, not the making of my sinus, the Chamorro people. Beautiful sights. Ati, Seribe, in Humatek. Ati means alluring. A place that mesmerizes you. It's a very beautiful site here in Guam. Also a part of the Guam Seashore Park. Below is the Humatek Bay area, the port of call for the Spanish galleons during the Spanish period up until 1819. Here is a very beautiful site, Punta de los Dos Amantes, in the western central side of Guam, related to the legend of the 2 lovers, a lad and a maiden, who leaped to their death from this point, rather than obeying the wishes of the maiden's father and the Spanish officer. Today, Tomon, the hub of Guam's tourism, and Tamuning, Puntan Satpun. This is the way you would see Guam today. But underneath all these new infrastructures are layers and layers and layers of past historical events that defines our own history here as a people, the Chamorro people of the Mariana Islands. Finally, in Chamorro, I know that they use this word more popularly today, inafamaulik, which means to be in peace, to be in good understanding, and all that. The base word is maulik, which means good. That maulik means to make good. Inafamaulik is to nominalize that word and say goodwill or in agreement. But the actual word really in Chamorro, because I've studied this, is not inafamaulik. The word is gof li'i. That is the fundamental values of the Chamorro people. And gof li'i comes from 2 words. Li'i means to see. Gof li'i means to truly see, which simply means Look beyond what had happened. Look beyond who you are. Look beyond everything and just go fleeing. Because that's the only way you can move forward as a people. And when you look at this, truly, the Chamorro people, of 500 years of Western contact, Panataguizan, who remain, we were the ones that remained to move this forward island, to move our island forward, as well as the Northern Marianas. That I can say. It was our sinus, and now today we are entrusted to, as descendants of the first people here in the Marianas, to move forward no matter what had happened in the timeline of our island's history. Gulf Li'i, a very powerful word in our language. And finally, because the earlier speakers talked about violence, sexual assault, and all this, the cases of Guam, I work for the Department of Parks and Recreation, the situation of the homeless, the situation of all these social issues that we're talking about, or will be talking about through this conference. And this didn't come from a scholar. This just came from a Chamorro elder, a signer. And I said, how naman malulufan to this thing? Why is this happening? I don't remember this when I was young, and I'm 70. I don't remember the homeless situation. And maybe there were violence and sexual assault, but to what degree, as they are reporting it today? And this signer simply stated, without any academic training, without any historical knowledge of a strong background or historical knowledge of the Chamorro people. And she simply went like this to me, Pagonu, my child, has Sisti think about this. Untungu hafa, do you know why? Naman matagriniyat paguna naani, why we are the way we are today? Elect niya. Sa, because man malefahit, we have forgotten. Taimanu, how we demand Chamorro, how we Chamorros have forgotten how to care for each other. That's what's happening. Now, I'm not saying because I see all these programs that are being done, but in my years of growing up here in Guam, families took care of the situation. If there was a young boy who was in my neighborhood, who was going off tangent with social issues, it was a community and the families that really came to try to bring him out of that situation or her out of that situation. It was a family matter. In the same light, with our elders, because I've also heard of elderly abuse, I don't remember this growing up here in Guam in yesteryears. Why? Because the families always considered Isaina, the elders, to be a part of the extended family system. They were not functional, but they were always a part because who raised me up were my grandparents. So they had a role in my house. They weren't out to all these different programs of senior citizenship and all that. And they say, oh, well, that's what they want. I don't really think so. But it's what they have to do now because we as a community have a change in the lifestyle. And I say this from an historical point of view. I also believe that, during all this cultural changes, I'll give you a perfect example because I went to school in Guam. My earliest recollection was 1956. And in growing up in Guam, this is the way I was taught. When I leave the house, my mother especially would go like this to me and all my siblings. And malaki eskwela ho, when you go to the school, guma mutsu. When you go to the school, that's your house. And when Anthony maestro, when you look at the teacher female, maestro male, sign now that is your parent. Parewa, eskwela ni guma mo. There's no separation between your house and your school. It's one. That samu, don't ever, this is what my mother would say, nauhungog, that I would hear, na timan oski hogis ka, that you did not obey what your teacher told you, even if that teacher was wrong. She will discuss that with the teacher. But that's how I understood the educational system and the home front, that they were one. They weren't separate. That is the traditional way here in Guam. And I believe also in the Northern Marianas, because I see this because I've taught there in some of the schools. So these are the things that I really have to say from the historical perspective of what had happened here in Guam, the change of the administration that brought change upon them that they didn't want to abide to, that probably caused some of this social issues, taking away maybe their ability to address these issues. And it's something really to think about, really to think about. And finally, I would just like to say thank you again to Duncan Jesus Masi, para esta organization, the organization of the coalition, the Guam Coalition of Sexual Assault and Family Violence, na makumbida that they have invited me. Pabi aru-adingan yan to address to you some of these historical changes in both culture and in history that has brought some of the social issues that we have today here on Guam. Not that they never existed, but the gravity of what it is today, I do not recall that in my 3 years growing up here in Guam, truly. Because the family, as the Chamorros have always understood it, is the foundation of society. It is the strength of society. And they make reference of COVID and all that. But let me tell you, working for the Department of Parks and Recreation, I'm the historian. My office is over at Paseo de Susana, which is a recreational area here in Guam. And really, within this past year, I have never witnessed in my entire years at Parks and Recreation, where I'm now seeing fathers, mothers, and children coming together at the Paseo, riding their bicycles, hiking, walking around as a family unit. That was so absent, really. It was either the father, the mother, or the children. But now I see the family unit. And isn't that so beautiful? That's what I remember here in Guam. That the families have the time to be together. No more of this computer at home and you're looking and you're knowing all the information through your computer, your website, and all that. But just being together as a family, even for 1 hour, more than 1 hour, so that you can appreciate really what it means to be a family, to be caring, to be thoughtful. It was just really, this is what our really, with the COVID situation here in Guam at least, this is the way I am seeing it. And I see this every night at the Paseo. And I say, why has this not been done for so long? Because the family got fragmented, meaning that the mother works, the father works, the time within the family situation is probably less. That's my interpretation. But now I see families coming together daily in front of my eyes. And that's what it is. Our history as a Chamorro people is really a history of our family strength to have put us throughout all these different time elements, historical timelines, and even through our own social issues. Sendang ko na si Zeus, maasi, with the deepest gratitude given na asi para todo something for all of you who are listening. The Ohalaramon, and I really wish that maybe my comments would bring back or have merit into the way you interpret these 4 days of the seminar. Wow, si Malia A. Ramirez, Chamorro, Ginini Islas Marianas, from the Mariana Islands, Island Guahan, from the island of Guam, Sendang ko na si Zeus, maasi.
Dankaluna Maasi, my Malia. And no, you're not going away just yet. I'm
Oh, that's
pretty
a question
sure.
and answer, right?
I know you're not
Yeah.
leaving.
Oh
I know
no,
there's
I
that
just thought
beautiful
no.
scenery.
Yeah, right.
But
Yeah.
thank you
Okay.
so much again because, folks, I really enjoy when I have a moment to visit with Malia. She has a wealth of information, and much as our elders have in the past, we are we communicate, we talk story, we are people of oral history, and Malia has a wealth of that um, under her wings. So I appreciate your sharing that. And that is just a really small, an iota of what you can share with everyone. So we appreciate your perspective and your stories that you share from all those that you have spoken to as well. One of the things that that was in the chat, of course, as we long to link back to our history and our culture, and just wanted to make note to everyone that we're reflecting on history and culture because March has been designated as Mes Chamorro or Chamorro Month. So how timely for us to also include our Saina Malia for being with us. One of the questions too that was in the chat, Malia, was the meaning of the Sinahi. And it was in the chat that noted that the person had heard it was uh, introduced by the Spaniards as a neck armor. Is that true? Or do you
No.
have some?
The, my information of the Sinahi is a cultural artifact that was found in some of the uh, pre-contact sites here on Guam. Now, how it was used, I do not really can base it. It was what do you call it? It was ornamentation or what? Um, but the word Sinai means it's like a crescent shape. And they say what something like the Marianas from the northern tip, because the Mariana Islands spans 500 miles, Guam being the southernmost to the northernmost island of the Marianas. But no, it wasn't during the Spanish period. That I do know. And in fact, the word for jury in Chamorro, we have borrowed from the Spanish, and the word is alhajas. Alhajas. That's a Spanish word. And that means ornamentation. It doesn't mean that the Chamorros did not have ornamentation, but not in the concept that the Spanish brought when they administered the Mariana Islands. So now you have all these different things about the gold. Yeah, those are a part of the art history because gold and silver came into the what we call the Manila galleon trade or the Lanao de China that came in from Mexico and the Philippines, and they were used as ornamentation, like pulseras. That's a Spanish word. Again, a bracelet, cadena, a chain, alitos is a Spanish word meaning earrings. But I'm pretty sure that Chamorro, I'm not pretty sure, I am sure that Chamorro's word ornamentation, but just how the that part of the information is to me very, very sketchy. But they did use ornamentation. It's the same thing with the tattoo. That was the other thing that was asked of me many times. The Chamorros have practice tattoo. Well, when you go to these archaeological sites, you can't retrieve that information because it's a decay. So, if did I answer that question? Was it during the Spanish period? No, the Sinai occurred during the pre-contact period
Got it.
or the
Thank you
Cape
so
of Good.
much.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, and I'm gonna have to also apologize because I know that people of my generation, when we were growing up, we were, as you know, forbidden to speak Chamorro in school. And
Right.
so I do recall, when corporal punishment was okay in the classrooms, I would have classmates being spanked with a ruler on their hands if they're heard speaking Chamorro. So I will attempt the question in the chat with as best Chamorro as I can. And the question is to you, Malia.
Go ahead.
Hapa hinasan mo put ninain and kanai? Did I say that
Ninayin,
correctly?
ninayin, o ninayin kanay. All right. This is it. And I've given a lot of speeches. on this or at trust, and one has to do with Chamorro medicine. And I was invited by the medical staff of the Navy here in Guam, the Navy Medical Center of the Marianas, or Camnaf Martha, to talk to doctors and nurses. But they wanted me to talk about Chamorro medicine, the traditional healing process of Chamorro, which I was able to do. Well, briefly, I brought a putu. This is a mortar stone about this size that I can hold in my hand, with the lumot, the pounder. And I asked them, could they give me any information of what this instrument is? And they couldn't give me an adequate information or the correct information. So I explained it to them. Well, I said, this is a putu, and I have this in my possession. It's a very beautiful piece. And I would believe it's over 2,000 years old, and it's still around today. And I said, well, this is what you're asking me about Chamorro traditional medicinal practices, because we only use natural, what do you call that? Leaves, roots, barks, and all that to produce the medicine. But I went like this to them. The instrument I am holding, and I did avail myself to a traditional ZOMT Chamorro in my village, Dan Maria, but she passed away. And I depended on her for about over 40 years because I was really having adverse effects of the medication being given to me by modern medicine, the different pills. My body was really reacting to it. But with her medicine, I never had any negative reaction. Well, she had a EFIT instrument to produce the medicine. And then I asked her, I said, Maria, how old is that EFIT pounder that you're using? And she couldn't recollect. She just said that, Maria, it went back to my great-great-great-grandmother, but it was handed out, and eventually she had the instrument. So I went to the doctor. So I addressed the doctors and the nurses, and I said, well, this one is about 2,000 years old. And what, I guess, amazed them, what they really couldn't understand. And I said, you know what, you're modern doctors. You have all the instruments to, what do you call that, diagnose your patient. Well, the ZOMT Chamorro traditional healers have this instrument. And you know what's different about it? They just don't take this instrument and dispose of it. You as modern doctors, you have a stethoscope, you have all these different instruments to diagnose your patient. And if it's not usable, it's gone. It's thrown away, disposed of. But to the Chamorros, like the one I have, like the one Maria has, that instrument has powers that is transposed from one generation to a generation to a generation to the time that Maria was practicing, traditional Chamorro medicine. And, it's really hard for anybody to understand this. How can this instrument have powers? But the Chamorros believe in the hands. We are human beings, Cynthia. And what is the hand? Take a good look, everyone, at your hand. This is a healing power. When I go to the hospital, or when I'm sick and somebody comes to my house, this is very special to me. Sometimes when he or she just touches me, there's that transmission of something. This is to me now. Like, my body, like Tanmarian Taitano. One day I was very sick. So I went to her house because my sister couldn't go get the medicine for me. So I drove up to her driveway, and the minute I saw her, something happened to my body. I can't explain this. And my body just got well. So months later, she went like this to me, not trying to not provide medicine for me anymore, but she went like this, Malia, because she was a child specialist. She was the best known child specialist, ZOMT, for young children, for any type of ailment. I was in the doubt. She went like this to me. Itamorning in the Chamorro culture of ZOMT, Guanabiyay na iminalong, the suffering transfers to her body. I know I can't explain this, and I'm not going to try to explain it anyway. I'm just saying the way they understood this, and it's not hocus pocus, and it's not hocus pocus, but you know, it's just something that when we're really looking, even from the earliest practice of medicinal healing to today, what do humans use as the instrument of the healing process? Ikanai. I don't care whether you're an MD or a Chamorro traditional healer. Ikanai is the process that we use as humans to begin the healing process. And we use different instruments. So the Chamorros, they use instruments of past because they believe that the Zoamti of the past puts power and it goes down through generation. And does it cure? Of course. All the young children that have these minor medical issues with, what do you call that, like with their lips or whatever, they would put some of the medicine through their nose and know that does help the child. And one thing I do know about Chamorro medicine is that it can never have an adverse effect on you. You can never overdose because, you know, the prescription was incorrectly administered to you. Isn't that interesting? Yeah, you can't. It's all, I mean, modern medicine too is based on plants and everything like that. But there are other elements. But in the Chamorro, and I practice, I'm a Zomti, but to myself. When I have these minor illnesses, and I still take the same medication that Tan Maria taught me. In fact, she didn't tell me that much, because that's the other Chamorro belief. When you share the information, it loses power. You know, these are the things that I have to, you know, here I am, Malia Ramirez, traditional scholar, I'm trying to understand all these things that the Chamorros practice, you know, in terms of traditional healing. But who am I to say that they are incorrect or they are not right?
Thanks so much, Malia, for sharing that. There is also a comment in the Q&A. Just want to read that. And of course, um, you know, I echo to what Chelsea shared in the Q&A about reaching out and going to the past. And there's that resurgence of that. Her comment is, how can the new generation of writers, speakers, scholars, people, youth reach out, listen to elders to seek advice on today's happening with an open communication? Youth and
Well,
elders speaking together without elders using age to speak over youth and take away youth. Thoughts, your opinion?
well, you know, most of my research is based on Chamorro oral history. But there's also, you have to understand that when they speak to me, they entrust to me some information that I am not able to disseminate to others. This is like almost sacred, you know. Malia, I'm providing this to you. I am telling you this so that you can understand. But this is my story, and it's a very personal story. So I really upheld that 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 tradition. Let me give you a case, an example. You know, growing up, I never heard about atrocities committed among Chamorro women here in Guam because it was never much said about. You know, it was like like it never happened. But today we're finding out, and so they tell me this, but it is not for me when they provide the information. Am I given the liberty to use their experience? Uh, Basically, they would tell me, but to use it to make the other person to understand, if you can understand, okay, in that context. So what I did from that question is, so what did I do between the academic and the traditional? Simple. Ekungok, 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 ekungok. I listen, I listen, and I listen. Then they would challenge me and they say, well, there are different versions. And I said, well, in the academic circle too, if you read some of the written documents, they conflict also. All right. So even with oral history, the community, Cynthia, would recognize, like when you go to the village and you say, oh, I really would like to know about traditional Chamorro place names. The villagers of each village would recognize that person, that's the one that holds the information. Like in my family, all right, they want to talk about family histories. Now, who do they go to? Me, because I wrote the book, La Sangre Zama. Or go to Malia because she has all that information, but not everybody has that information. They have some information, but not in the level that I do have that information, or Chamorro Proverbs, you see? So let the community recognize those people that have this information and know about the information and its accuracy. Okay. Or did that answer the question? No. Did that answer the
And
question?
yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely. Because I know, Malia, whenever I'm fortunate to be in your company,
Okay.
you share all the connections.
All right. Okay. Okay. So let me give you one perfect example so that people can really understand this. So I forget the year, but just several years ago. So the National Park Service sends me up to Tinian, Saipan, for the dedication of their American Park Museum. But part of the dedication was a tour of the World War II runways of Tinian, where the A-bomb was flown from, the Enola Gay. And guess who came? Paul Tibbets, the senior officer that flew on that flight. He was about 90, I think, or near 90. And believe me, we were out there in the field where the A-bomb was loaded, and he was explaining all of this. I couldn't take my eyes off Paul Tibbets. Because in my mind, Cynthia, as a Chamorro, I'm going like this. My gosh, 80 people, I'm sorry, 80,000 people died instantaneously through the dropping of the atomic bomb. And that was my academic interest as a Chamorro, because that's what I wanted to know and all that. That evening, they flew me back to Saipan, and I visited one of my most informative, Sina. And she wanted this to me. Malia, where'd you come from? Like, oh, Tinian. So I just came from Tinian. Oh, for the Mugi, what are you doing in Tinian? Ay, pabili na these ceremonies, pwede, anima, suli, bomba. When they took the bomb, the mabomba hapon. The Megiman Mountain. And the Sina went to me. Oh, I don't know, Mono. That's why you went there. She went like this to me. Being a Malia. I go, being a Malia, my child. Hasu esti. Think about this. Mausa itanota. They use our land, our islands, to execute one of the most devastating historical accounts in human history, the dropping of 2 atomic bombs. That was her Chamorro perspective. She wasn't concerned like I did, who was Pope Tibbets. She wasn't concerned about the B-29. She would care less about that. She cared about her homeland. Hasu. Think about this. Think about this. Think about this. Namausay itanota, that they use our land to execute one of the most tragic events in World War II history. That's the way she was looking at it. And there are many instances like that, where when I talk to the scientists, it just immediately reverts me back to, Malia, think the way they think. Because that's how you're going to understand your history as a Chamorro. Is that clear? Was that clear?
Yes, loud and clear.
Loud and clear.
Thank you so much, Malia.
There's so many examples of that. Let me give you a perfect example. Even with World War II sites, like the one that told me, they said, no, I can't go down to Tumon and take out the, you've seen this, right? When you're taking a hike and you see the gun emplacements, they're so camouflaged, and destroy them. That's my role, to preserve historic structures. But then I'm kind of struggling in my mind. God, you're Chamorro, bring it back to what it was. No, Malia, you can't do that. Let us say so they can remind us what had happened in this place. You see what you're dealing with? So, this is the other perspective. Some people don't really want monuments in some of these park sites of World War II. Why would you want to go to a place that would go like this? We destroyed this. This is how many people died. I mean, is that what we're trying to transfer? Violence into the community? This is what your seminar's about, you know? Violent acts of war on a
And
very, yes, on
and
a people that are
Malia,
very innocent. Yes.
Malia, this just tells me we need to perhaps do for our next project
Yes.
more mini podcast sessions so that we can share the many stories that you have.
Oh, sure.
Because,
Yeah.
and you know that we can tell stories all weekend long. And so, but we will really appreciate your sharing. And I
So,
know I've been following in the chat about how there are similarities, say, to tribal lands and to the stories of the Native Americans as
oh,
well, the
yeah.
indigenous people,
Perfect
right?
example. Yeah. Because they forget that there were people here living before, that these are
Right.
safe areas. We read this on Guam all the time in the paper. But what's happening to the American Indian, their sacred sites, because the new development has to be done. Well, we're going to have to rethink this, and see how it benefits the indigenous group who were there first, who interpreted the land and the landscape of that area associated to their cultural beliefs and traditions. Yes, that's very true.
And I know there are other questions in the Q&A.
Yes.
We will get back to you and respond to it in due time, Malia, only because
Okay.
I do have our next speaker online,
Yes, I know that.
and
Uh-huh.
it's and you and
I
I
know I know
both know.
I know the Rapadas family, yeah, pretty well. Yeah.
Yes, definitely, and he can talk story all day long,
Also,
just like us, right?
okay, yeah. Talk stories
But
the way they say it in Hawaii. Yeah. Talk story. Yeah,
right.
yeah.
But
I want
Malia, stick
yeah.
around. Not
Okay.
that there'll be extra time after
Yeah.
Dr. Juan prepares his speech, but I'm pretty sure we also have questions in the chat. So I'll ask Dwayne to share those questions in the Q&A with you,
Okay.
and
Sure.
then can be answered perhaps in the chat, or we'll be able to get back to that when the session is over. But do recall though that today's just day one. Tomorrow, day two, we have Trisha Lizama, who will speak more about healing from a culturally responsive way. But here in the room right now, we are very fortunate to now have Dr. Juan Rapadas, who is the clinical psychologist who received his bachelor's degree in biology from University of San Francisco, bachelor's degree in psychology from University of Guam, continued on at University of Hawaii, receiving both an MA in psychology and a PhD in clinical psychology. Then he received his postdoctorate MS in clinical psychopharmacology. Dr. Rapadas is currently licensed as a clinical psychology in CNMI and Guam, and also holds a psychology license in Hawaii. Dr. Rapadas currently works in his role at the Judiciary of Guam in the Client Services and Counseling Division. And he has many hats and is very much in demand here on Guam. So we are certainly very fortunate, Dr. Juan, that you are able to join us in your busy time. I know you just came from doing a clinical, so I appreciate your rushing to be on as well. Thank you and welcome.
Am I
Will you be
doing the
handling
old,
your slides?
yeah. I actually, I don't know how to do the slides. I have it on my computer. Are you able to do that or no?
Yes, I shall help you out with that then.
Yeah,
And
I'm just really not, I was born in 1964, so I'm the last baby boomer.
a
And
day.
so
I'm a signer to you and I can
you
handle
are,
this.
you are. But can you show them my slides? Because I
I
don't know
will
how. Okay,
and then just prompt me then and we can work this thing
very
out.
good,
Give
very
me a
good.
quick moment.
Well, I'm glad to be with you all. I think if I'm seeing this correctly, about 89 folks are on. And I'm mostly glad that I'm not wearing a mask because I'm in my office and I'm isolated from anyone. So all morning I had my mask on talking to folks, and I just really appreciate this time with you all, and being able to share some of my thoughts and feelings about, I guess, and reflections on Guam's history and culture. You're seeing the slide, addressing violence in our communities today. Gosh, I've probably been licensed for about 20 years now in Guam. Um, and I've been working in the court system at DYA, private practice. I did work with Head Start, Social Security, and DISID. So I've been around and I've seen a lot. And let me just go right to the disclaimer as we go ahead and start. Go ahead and do the next slide. So these are opinions of me. They don't reflect any opinions of any former employees or current employer. I have no financial or connections with the coalition. I know Cynthia gave me $1,000 check, but I had to tear it up, and she said it would bounce, so I wouldn't cash it. I'm just kidding. Got no money. We're all doing this for free for the love of our island, and she asked me to do this because I've got a lot of thoughts about this. The other disclaimer that I didn't write here, that it is not necessarily related to financial or opinions. The other disclaimer is I've always been a psychologist, and the definition of a psychologist is someone who works generally individually, diagnoses individuals, and comes up with treatment plans. I mean, that's essentially, if you're a licensed psychologist, that's pretty much from 8 to 5, and even after 5, that's all you're doing. You're kind of helping individuals. So my disclaimer would be that I'm not a sociologist, and I'm not a someone who, or a legislator, or someone who can come up with kind of macro policies. I'm always interested in the person and their lives and the people around them. But in doing that, I've come up with in a lot of situations where I'm perplexed and trying to figure out how to help this person. And it kind of sometimes goes beyond the individual sphere. And you got to look beyond. So you got to look into the family sphere, the neighborhood sphere, the community, and then also the island and the culture and the whole context of where they came from. And I've been blessed to been able to study all those things and have great mentors along the way who appreciate culture as a true and real variable in someone's development of both psychopathology or illness and also healing. So I've been able to, in my, I say 20 years as a licensed person, and then about my 30 years of being or interested in psychology, being able to see a whole range of approaches and ways of looking at things. So with that disclaimer, let's go into the next one. I'm going to follow along with you. Okay, actually it's right there. So, again, I don't claim to be a historian. I'm a psychologist. I study and read just like everybody else. I probably, some of you might have read a lot more than me, but I'll just do a brief talk about our colonial past, and then the transmission of violence through the generations, and the fallout of colonialism, cultural, community, and family destruction and humiliation, which trickles down to the individual, which is where that's my wheelhouse. I work with the individual and of course with families. We'll talk a little bit about the manifestation of the past suffering and pain that's kind of shown itself in our communities in many ways, and we'll talk about that. I mean, that's kind of where my specialty is, kind of suffering and pain, kind of like a doctor would deal with suffering and pain. I deal with the mental and the emotional and the behavioral sufferings of folks. And then the last parts, we'll talk about what is being done, what can be done, and some aspirational, practical, long-lasting change for the Chamorro people that hopefully we can discuss and really get into it. I think that my disclaimer for that is, again, if I'm doing anything to earn my keep, I'm trying to help the individual. But what I try and help them is to look past just their individuality and look where they live in the context of their own culture. Okay, go ahead and just briefly, I put discovered because it's not politically correct to discover people that's been around for thousands of years, right? And I don't claim to know all the real history, but it was really one of the seminal times in our lives that the Spanish, which was a European country, came in and claimed Guam as their own, which then started really kind of dismembering the destruction of the culture, the people, intentional, not intentional. Everyone knows if you're a scientist, you introduce something new to a community, it can actually destroy a big part of them, like a disease. Or people always talk about flights that come in from around the world here on Guam, and the reason why we have customs quarantine, because what if there's one little bug there that's foreign to the foliage, which then destroys all the coconut trees and banana trees, and not just little bugs, but also I heard competing plants could sneak into the island and end up destroying like 80% of the population of banana trees or coconut trees. So they come and they came and just the whole series through the decades of just a breakdown of the Chamorro people, such that again, reading from the history books, again, I don't claim to be a historian, but they talk about having no native Chamorro person being left. Probably they said the last one might have died 1800s possibly. So that's kind of our colonial horrible past. This quote here was actually from an article that I wrote that some of you, if you went through Anna Torrey's class at UOG, you read my article about transgenerational trauma. It was in the Journal of South Pacific Psychology. So I basically wrote the tears, the blood, the humiliation, the wresting of lands, the dilution, and the overall suffering remains embedded in the soil, in the trees, in the air, and in the memories, consciousness, and inner souls of the surviving Chamorro. Again, my training in psychology, my professors would say, "What are you talking about? We have to diagnose this person. Do they have ADHD? Do they have cognitive disorder? This stuff is not taught, and it's something that thankfully both my master's and doctorate professor, Dr. Tony Marcel, I got to give him credit for standing up for me to study, to do my studies here on Guam and about our people. And I was able to inculcate some of this literature into my work, my graduate work. Okay, next slide. So that the end of the Spanish reign came in 1898, as we all know, beginning of the U.S. age. And there's this whole period where it's like we don't even know who we are, what we were politically, economically, and then they're interrupted. I use that quotations as kind of like it's not minimizing what happened, of course, in the another destruction of Guam, but it's seen in the history books as kind of like a blip. For the U.S. was always going to try and come back for us and things like that. And I have stories about my mother burying the American flag and singing that song, Uncle Sam, Please Come Back to Guam. Her and her sisters being kind of slapped. And they were actually part Japanese. My grandmother's half Japanese. And there were a lot of stuff was expected of them. That stuff figures into my psychology, and in some small, actually in large part, for a lot of the Chamorros who had grandparents, great grandparents during the Japanese occupation. is significant. And as I looked and I look into the family violence and the drug culture today in our people, I see kind of a shadow effect from this occupation. And then back in the U.S. hands, military agenda, of course, it brought Guam into the kind of economic picture, kind of make it, Guam became, I guess, economically more relevant in terms of matching or becoming Americanized. It's very, very clear, Guam, just in terms of modernization, benefited in modernization, benefited much more from being in the U.S. hands than a lot of our Pacific Island neighbors. Just on a practical level, they see Guam as, so Guam, right? We often see Hawaii as like, oh, that's the place to go to get the healthcare and some of the stuff there in Hawaii, Costco. A lot of the folks in our Pacific Island neighbors see Guam as that way. There's a Kmart, it's the Ross thing, and so it's not, just a practical matter. It's not all negative. This whole idea about consumerism. And being able to have the modern accoutrements of life, computer, Wi-Fi. I think we take that for granted here, in large part to the modernization of the U.S. Influence, and of course, and the upside / downside, the military, conscripting so much territory. And then also this idea that Guam being a possible target of rogue nations, of course, North Korea and China. So a lot of ups and downs. Again, not a political science major, but all this figures into a lot of individual psychology. And I see it, I weave it into my patients / clients' histories. And maybe I'm a little bit more aware of those things, and I use that knowledge judiciously when I talk to folks. Okay, next one. So if we go back to the definition of transgenerational transmission of violence, so there must be thousands and thousands of articles about this concept. And it goes back, this transmission of violence goes way, way back. I mean, even beyond our Pacific Island borders, if you look at the Middle East, I remember being so young and watching the Ten Commandments and trying to understand what's the deal with Moses and the Pharaoh and slaves and the Egyptians and the Hebrews. I had the other day, my wife said, hey, John, can you just explain to me what's the deal with the Jews and the Arabs? So in my own, I think I probably copied the script of the Ten Commandments, and I told her that to this day, that stuff still reverberates. This idea of the trauma from one people to another, how it's still, if you go back 10 commandments, it still goes back. So stuff like slavery. So the idea of the Hebrews being the slaves of the Egyptians, famine. Some communities, I think, like in Ireland, there's potato famine. You can probably trace stuff, violence, trauma, things that happen in those times. After the African famines, how it continues to reverberate, natural disasters. I think I saw a movie called The Impossible the other day about that terrible tidal wave that went through Banda Aceh and Indonesia, and over 200,000 people died. That's more than the population of Guam, and one day just wiped out a whole one-fifth of a million people, and that obviously still reverberates war for Guam. This is probably the most salient of the stressors, the violence, the transmission for us. World War II. My dad is actually from the Philippines. My mom is from here, but they both have trauma from their own side of the war, and I can tell you, even though I didn't experience, it affected. It's kind of the way that we related to each other. Obviously, not to the point where I had to overcome all these criminal histories, drug addiction, and all those things, but enough for me to recognize the effect that war had on them, which then had an effect on me. Terrorism, just a modern day scourge for our modern times. Although terrorism obviously existed many centuries ago, just for our purposes, that event of was it 20 years ago almost now? 2000, yeah. It affects us today, and my children as well, as we were always airports and things like that. And then the government agencies that came about because of that. Gosh, we should also put in this list the pandemic. That's like the new thing. That what's happening to us in the last year is reverberating probably for years, maybe decades. And that so as an aside, and the pandemic for us in the mental health field, we're seeing a lot more anxiety, depression, suicide, and drug abuse, drug and alcohol abuse, and that was literally just in the last year. So imagine how that happens, and let's say those things happen to a family, and then each of the individual stories can reverberate in their own family histories. But in these other things, a bigger scale, like the war and natural disasters, it's a much bigger scale. Although, let me take that back. Pandemic was a worldwide thing. So, okay, next slide. And then more proximal causes of transgenerational trauma. So, let's say we had one family, and there's kind of a normal upbringing, average, no real big issues, and then one generation has issues of child abuse, terrible child abuse, either a father or mother or both physically, sexually abuse the child, and then you're just basically setting up a whole host of problems that could actually go past just that child's generational issues, and then they grow up, and then they pass that trauma to their children, etc. Poverty, actually they poverty more than race. It's such a big topic with now with race relations and things like that. The research shows that poverty cuts across race. It's a giant variable in terms of causing trauma and passing on of trauma. Extreme poverty. We were just seeing some stuff we haven't seen. I think that this just to be a little more topical, the southern border and all the Central American country folks that are coming to America, I think what they're experiencing in their countries is just extreme. I mean, stuff that we in America, we can't even, I say Guam, America, that we can't even imagine how poor and how much they're suffering, that they have to leave their home. And that reverberates through the years. Sudden violent death of a family member. I actually, when I was young, I remember reading and hearing about the assassination of John F. Kennedy, right? But there was also a policeman who died that day. I think his name is Tippit, Officer Tippit. And I just read recently, it was a podcast about the widow. She just died, and she talked about her children and his death, violent death. He was killed by Lee Harvey Oswald as well. So there were two people that died, were killed that day, the President of the United States and his policeman. And it was sudden, it was violent. And the widow who died, she was interviewed and talked about the profound changes of their family, their children, and how it affected them, and how that will reverberate through their family's generation. Crime against the family. We're just seeing all these just terrible. Sometimes you just don't want to look at the internet and look at all these videos of just some terrible things that are happening to individuals and individuals' families, just murders and just and senseless things that has proximal cause to trauma that'll last for a while. A parent who fought in a war. So here we're talking about men and women, brave veterans in the service who have come back from combat, who before they went to combat, they're just regular, just a teenager, but they came back quite changed and different. There's been dozens and dozens of movies that talk about the PTSD and the effects of war and how that passes through generation and generation. When I was doing my pre-doc internship in Hawaii, I actually did my 1 year at the VA hospital, and I did a PTSD rotation, and the folks that I was seeing was more in the Vietnam War veterans, which was having kind of I missed the window. I was born in '64, so if I was born 10 years earlier, I would be kind of like their 10 to 15 years earlier. I would have been their counterpart, might have been drafted, but I'd seen and heard enough to know that it was pure hell, like all war is. But there was something about Vietnam. There was something about it, and these folks were profoundly affected, and still are. In fact, the veterans, the Vietnam veterans, are slowly, one by one, they're passing away. They're probably in their mid 70s to 80s. It used to be we were watching the World War II veterans passing away, but I think they're pretty much all gone now. The combat vets, and if you were to talk to anyone, and I still every once in a while I'll have someone in my office who talks about their dad who had PTSD from Vietnam. So then of course torture, just maiming, just a lot of stuff that we see in the political climate that we have. So and I just actually remember recently, and I think I'll talk about this later, but I'll just go into it right now. I think it was the 70th anniversary, or I'm not sure when it was, but it was when they were talking about the War Claims Commission, and they needed to get testimony. And I did not know this, but I had known about comfort women from Korea and even the Philippines, and then it started dawning on me as I was listening to some of these our Chamorro women who are obviously in their 80s and 90s now, talking about them being used for the Japanese soldiers as comfort women. I mean, just the term comfort women is an oxymoron, right? It's more like a hell what they went through, but just that has an effect. So imagine a young woman being a comfort woman, and then having their own families, et cetera, and how you can see that effect could last with their children and their children's children. So those are some examples of proximal causes. I'm looking at my time here. Holy moly, we got to move here. I could talk forever on this. Go ahead, Cynthia. Okay, so we're talking about the fallout. So here's my wheelhouse. PTSD. That's my job. I diagnose folks. When I see these four symptom clusters that are affecting them more than, I think it was, I want to say 6 months or more than a month to 6 months. If you're seeing these things, these symptoms, it's likely that PTSD. And then the main thing about PTSD, you have to find a focal trauma. But over the last 20, 30 years, clinicians aren't focusing just on the focal trauma, let's say a rape or an accident or combat trauma. And you're talking sometimes now we're talking about trauma that's daily, trauma that people are suffering, chronic episodes of trauma. So they've kind of included that in the dialogue about understanding PTSD, that it's not just a one time where you had something happen in combat or a one-time sexual assault in an elevator, right? Now we're talking about years of sexual abuse and physical abuse that has the effect, literally changes the brains of people as children, and how that has the effect over time. The fallouts, depression, hopelessness, helplessness. Both. If you're looking at both, the bigger issues with like the destruction of a culture, and then you're talking about PTSD and war and disasters. All of this is all happening. Depression and hopelessness, helplessness, anxiety, panic, and worry. This pandemic has just bumped up people's anxiety, I want to say about 2 or 3 times more than usual. And we just and it's just very disheartening. It's weird because those of us who are in the field, like, we have to deal with our own stuff, and it's really hard. So when you talk about this last line here, I wanted to make sure people get this. And this is why the transgenerational issue, the transitional trauma passing to other generations is true. Because when you're ill or suffering or dissociating or numb, it's impossible to nurture, to reach out, care for, soothe, heal, especially your children. So I can't tell you the dozens and dozens of people that I've seen where I see that happening, that disconnection, and then the children are become lost. Now that we're all thoroughly depressed, we got to keep moving forward. Let's see what else I got. Cynthia, next slide. So your typical PTSD symptoms, when you see these things, startle, danger, self-destructive behavior. We can talk 14 days about drinking and drugs, the self-medication stuff, trouble sleeping, concentrating, all this stuff, and just sometimes overwhelming guilt and shame that comes with trauma, anger outbursts, irritability, aggressiveness. Go ahead. Next slide. Oh, Cynthia, just as in terms of timing here, I know I was supposed to be till 10:30. How far do I go? How far?
10:30. You
Okay.
have till 10:30.
Okay, so I've got about 7 or 8 minutes. I'm getting there. I can finish this up. And by the way, can you make the slides available to folks?
Absolutely, it will be on our website.
Very good. So, these are all not earth-shattering stuff, but I just kind of put it together. If you notice, I put bubbles in water because water is life. So I just wanted to have people happy while we're talking about depressing things. So all this leads to failure to thrive. You literally can see how children, when you see children who have gone through lots of trauma, generational trauma, kids who are thriving, they're literally smaller. You can measure their brains; they're smaller. Physically, they just don't develop, and those issues are all there. It leads to physical and sexual violence, poor physical health, alcohol and drug abuse, crimes, incarcerations. That's my forte. Just so many of our local folks and also our folks from other islands just coming into our system, and I can see, I can look at them and I can already tell, kind of read the tea leaves about all the trauma that they've been through, and then I know their context as well, and just in terms of the historical and the historical traumatic context, and so that so all these things contribute to the soul wounding in insidious ways. This comes out of Eduardo Duran's work. He's got few books that talk about healing the soul through with indigenous folks. And those of you, I'm sure, all you 70, whoever's all listening right now, you're familiar with Duran's work. Go ahead and change that. And dealing with, and so the way to deal with trauma is passed down. Silence is actually functional. If you don't talk about it, think about it, you try not to feel so bad. But then the problem with that is, it's then your children are like, what the hell, man? What's wrong? And you don't want to go there, because then you might be afraid that you're going to just lose it, right? Dealing with trauma, don't be hopeful, just keep the expectations low. Let's just kind of wallow in our sorrow. That's what we know. And this idea about not asking for help is dangerous. I don't want to trust people. Who's going to trust? These people are dangerous. The world is dangerous. People are dangerous, and that's passed down through generations. And then literally, when you're talking about trauma through the body, I mean, Guam and Pacific Islanders, if we're going to be champions of anything, we're champions of the bad things. Obesity, diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, kidney, liver disease, cancer is just running rampant, cigarette smoking. In a lot of places in the world, cigarette smoking is going down, but we're just always staying up. We might be keeping this tobacco companies in business. Guam, we're just, how people talk about Kmart. They're one of the best Kmarts here, the best Ross. Every time I go to a Ross in the States, it's like there's nobody there. I go to Ross here, I'm like, what are all these people? We're keeping the tobacco companies and the vaping companies afloat. I think that that's all passed down. It's just the way to deal with trauma, and it's just a very bad way, okay? And then it doesn't help when you're ashamed and you're isolated, and you all who are social workers here, I'm talking about, they're the ones that are out in that some of these roads are called swamp roads and Evermind Road, whatever all these roads that we talk about, they're out there and they're isolating and they're hiding right now. A lot to do with shame, accessibility to healthcare. There's a vicious cycle of illness. So as I have about 3 or 4 minutes to go, I have other solutions. So stay tuned, because here we go. We're going to save the world. Not really, but go ahead and we'll see what is being done. We've got, thankfully, the research over the last 30, 40 years. I'm talking about the recognition of this effect. It's real. It's true. I lived it. My grandparents, my parents. We got to be careful with uncovering the secrets, but sometimes, people, they go to their graves. They do. We know that without uncovering. But if done the right way, you can uncover the secret, put it in perspective, and start from where you're at. Even an 80, 90-year-old can start healing. And you just get them to be present focused. Talk with that son that's the black sheep, that 55-year-old son that maybe it's because of the trauma, your trauma, you just haven't been able to ever reach out. That one time, I could, if I had a dime for everyone who said, in the end, even though how terrible my mom and dad was, what we made up before he or she died. And I always have a lump in my throat when I hear that, because someone got to them. I don't know, maybe it's a therapist, maybe it's the Holy Spirit, I don't know. Someone got to them and said, that those 2 words, 3 words in the end can make a world of difference. So you just let them be present focused, put the past in perspective, and then work to the future. There are cultural approaches to healing. When I was doing my graduate work, This was kind of the heyday, the highlight of Native American healing practices, even Japanese American healing practices, the Samoan healing practices. Just when I was being taught in Hawaii, it was a great time to be in that era, and it's still going on. And there are a lot of ways you can just Google. Thank God for Google. You can Google Morita therapy or this therapy where you're you're in a hot steaming bath house of something. I forgot what it's called, but it's out there and it helps connect people back. Language and culture preservation. In fact, today's paper, there's an article in from San Diego about a house of Chamorros. They're gonna just read in the paper, guampdn.com, Pokin House of Chamorros, San Diego. And this family of Chamorros and a bunch of Chamorros there, they're trying to make like a museum-ish place where local folks can go there and just learn about the culture, eat the culture, and do all those things. So it's all there. Those are the good things that are happening. I'm kind of hypocritical, but I always make fun of those people who sit there and talk about, I found out my great grandfather was a mayor of Philadelphia or something through Ancestry.com. But you know, the clinicians have been doing that for a while, a genogram, tracking people's history and how it actually reconnects them back to their past and they can understand themselves. It's super important. And someone's making a lot of money at Ancestry.com and all those things. And it actually can be very therapeutic. Let's go to the next one. We're almost done. Sorry, Cynthia. So it's all about reconnecting to anything and to everything, okay? And it's talking about balancing traditional diets and the modern science of nutrition. So we don't, again, I'm a baby boomer, right? So, but I still do keto. Come on, man. I didn't think of keto back 5 years ago, but I'm lost about good 15 pounds. So, but I also, you know, eat some complex carbs with the taro and things like that. Eat a lot of fish. Eat the natural fruits. We can do all that. You know, that's good. We just blend it. Don't say this present time is bad, because it's not all bad. There's some things you can learn. Outreach communities. So handouts when needed, right? Hand up when appropriate, right? So there's this that give a man a fish thing. He eats for a day. Teach him how to fish. They eat for a lifetime. Those need to be more focused. And there's a lot of that stuff going on. Let's do stewardship and not patronizing. You know, one thing I really hate is just saying, oh, you know, you're Chamorro and you should learn you know, you don't just tell them about what they should do and how they should love their culture. You know, it's about looking at the culture as an aspect of somebody and then everything else about their life and active partnering with them, looking at indigenous ways, how they got well on their own, using public and private sectors and not just always selling for the status quo. I think we're almost done. Cynthia, one more. And just about 15 years ago, I wrote an article. Again, you can Google it. You put my name, you look for transmission of violence. You'll see the article. It's free, printed. And I presented at American Psychological Association national conference. I was happy. I had about 30 people show up on that one. And these were the things that I came up with. You can read the article. Specifically for Guam, I thought these were one of the things that I liked best was the Chamorro Peace Summit. I think it's probably been a few of those already. This in part is part of this effort to creating peace in home and the community for the Chamorro people. And I think that it's really important that we work on some of those things. And remember, this is 15 years ago and it's still relevant. So look it up, Google my name and transmission of violence, you get the article. Next one. And that's it. Yeah. And there's my email. Just my name at gmail.com. The slides are available for you. Thank you for listening. And it's so weird to do this Zoom. I just can't wait till this is over, because I read some of the comments. It's great. I don't see faces. I don't see like, amen, brother, you know, all those type of stuff. That's the stuff I need. So maybe next year when we're back in reality, not wearing masks, we can do this again. Thank you very much.
Situs Maasi one. Thank you so much for joining us. And yes, I do know when we do these face-to-face, we can go for days just being able to share with each other. So I know we're just running out of time. We're nearly at the half hour. So we appreciate everyone who has participated with us. And we are cognizant of your time and we value your time. We
Thank
thank
you.
you for participating. Thank you to Dr. Juan for joining us. And then to the prior speakers, Zuzmasi, to our sign up, Malia Ramirez, and then to Julian for sharing excerpts from his book. And of course, to our Magahaga, the governor, for opening our today's session for us. But I just want to make sure that I do acknowledge the people behind the scenes. So I want to thank Dwayne, who's with the coalition, who is supporting Malia in our training center. So we'll be able to provide that. To Taylor, who's behind the scenes, also making sure that she keeps up with the chats and does reminders. And here in the office, supporting me here behind the scenes is Nate, picking up the phone so I won't have to do that while I'm doing the Zoom. We actually have another webinar or another training going on simultaneously to this. So half of the staff is tending to that. And we try to be at all places when we can. So we want to also acknowledge our ASL interpreters. And although you don't see him, you see Alyssa right now, but Kanai is with our office and he is the one supporting us and making sure that we have ASL interpreters. And we would like to thank our caption techs for being with us as well today. Polly Ron is also behind the scenes and helped me with the visual aids and the videos that you saw today. And we thank you so much for joining us. Without further ado, please join us tomorrow. And just a hint too, because it was just easier just in case you changed your mind. We figured you only wanted to do day one, and just in case you wanted to join us for day two, but you didn't sign up for that, well, I sent you the link anyway. So we'll see you tomorrow, same time, and we will have Dr. Tricia Lizama, who will also now speak to the healing from a culturally responsive way. So we want to especially thank our speakers today for providing the opportunity to do the dialogue, and we will have more day 3 and day 4 next week. So we say Biba, not just to the Guam Coalition, but Biba to you all for being with us. Sainamasi.